Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth of our Governance Health Check Wednesday workshops brought to you by the Developing Governance Group. My name is Denise Copeland, Governance and Charity Advice Manager in NICFA, and my co-presenter today is Denise Hayward, CEO in Volunteer Now. Together we provide joint secretariat to the Developing Governance Group, and we will be giving you plenty of tips on how to review your governance using the Code of Good Governance and its complementary resources. So I'd first like to tell you a little bit about the Development Governance Group that is responsible for the Code of Good Governance in Northern Ireland. The group was formed in 2006 with the specific mandate to develop a set of standards for governance in the sector, and so produced the first Code of Good Governance in 2008. Currently, there are representatives from 12 sector support organisations, all of which have a particular governance focus within their membership or subsector, and you will recognise some or all of the names of these organisations on the screen. And NICFA and Volunteer Now provide the joint secretariat to the group. So the third edition of the Code of Good Governance was launched 4 years ago in 2021. And the code sets out the principles and key elements of good governance in an organisation, as well as giving you the recommended practice as well. And this is what we really focused in on this third edition of the Code of Good Governance, was adding more recommended practice to help trustees on the boards to identify, to put into practice what the principles actually were. So the Code of Governance, whilst it isn't in itself mandatory, it is considered best practice. It is closely linked to regulatory responsibilities, and the Charity Commission for Northern Ireland does endorse it and does highly recommend it to all charities that are registered with it. So the 5 key principles in this third edition of the Code of Good Governance. The first one is that the board would understand its function in delivering organisational purpose. The second is that the board would work as an effective team, that the board would maintain control, that the board would be making effective decisions, and that the board is ultimately responsible for managing risk. The fourth principle there is all about integrity and about the board acting with integrity. And the fifth principle there, being open and accountable, is what we're going to concentrate on today. And you can see already that I've been using the terminology board and trustees. And this is the terminology that the Code of Good Governance uses when referring to the governing body. But you might call yourself the committee or the management committee or the elders or the vestry, executive committee. You might be the council. You might call yourself some other label that I haven't got there on the screen. But when we refer to the board, we are talking about you if you call yourself the committee. And we'll also use the term as well on the committee in some of the examples that we'll show you. So who's the Code of Good Governance for? Well, it's for any voluntary organisation in Northern Ireland. Whether you're a registered charity, whether you call yourselves a not-for-profit organisation, a social economy enterprise, a social enterprise, a faith organisation, or a sports organisation, the Code of Good Governance is for any voluntary-led organisation in the voluntary and community sector. So you're all very welcome here today. And I'm going to hand over now to Denise, who is going to take us through some of the complementary resources to the Code of Good Governance.
Thanks very much, Denise. And can I add my welcome to you all this afternoon? And I hope that you'll find this session really useful and look forward to hearing all your questions at the end. So as Denise said, we've developed the Code of Good Governance, and the principles are laid out in the small book that you will have seen, I'm sure, which is just shown in the slide there. But I suppose we, as a developing governance group, always understood that the code in itself is just words on a page, and what really matters is how you use it and how you bring it to life. And for that reason, then we have developed a couple of key complementary resources that I'd just like to talk to you about today. So first of all, the DIY committee guide, and there is a website address that Denise is showing you, and a QR code there that you can scan in if you want to access the DIY committee guide. The committee guide has been shaped to match, to mirror the code. So if you're looking at Principle 1, you can go on to the DIY committee guide and you can access resources to support you in the implementation of Principle 1 or Principle 2 or whatever it is. And as we go through our presentation this afternoon, you'll see some screenshots of some of the resources that are part of the DIY committee guide, just to give you a bit of an idea. It's a mixture of kind of text that kind of explains a little bit more about the words on the page in the code and how you might implement them, as well as some very practical downloadable resources, policies, things like that, that you can actually use to take things forward. And also it's a very useful signposting tool. So it can take you off to other websites that allow you then to read more and find out more about some of the information that you might need. The second complementary resource I want to talk about is the governance health check. And again, we'll be looking at samples of that this afternoon so you can see the format of it. Basically, it's a self-assessment questionnaire, and that's really important. Nobody's looking over your shoulder when you do that. You can do it as an individual or as a small group of committee members, or as indeed the whole committee. And it's really important that you use it honestly, that you say the warts and all story, that nobody's going to check up on this for you. It's important that you use it just as it's meant to be. It gives you a sliding scale to answer the question, whether you've fully met something, whether you've partly met something, whether you haven't met something. And it gives you some suggested evidence in each section that kind of might point you to whether or not you have something in place that would help you to meet that aspect of the health check. And at the end of each little principle section, you can have a mini action plan, and that can help you then to kind of find a route map. I think, Denise, if you want to pop on to the next slide, you can see that little roadmap image. And that's what this is. The health check will help you put together your little roadmap for implementation of the code. It is important to take time to complete it. Don't bite off more than you can chew. There's a lot of material and a lot of information in here. It's perfectly fine to do one principle at a time, to work through them and then move on to the next one. And it's also great if you can pull together a little team of trustees or team of trustees and other volunteers who can kind of help with some of this stuff so that it's not all falling on the shoulders of one person. The other thing that you'll see in terms of this is an information introduction and a glossary in the code. The glossary is particularly important because some of the language in this area can sometimes feel a bit unapproachable, and sometimes people use words that you're not maybe necessarily sure about what they mean. And so we've included that sort of aspect both in the paper-based copy of the code and also on the DIY committee guide, where you can look things up and kind of dig underneath things and get to grips with what things actually mean. So I'm going to hand you over now to Denise, who's going to take you back through the Principle 5.
Thank you, Denise. So Principle 5 is all about being open and accountable. Okay. So the principle states that the board leads the organisation by being open and transparent, accountable and responsive. So the board should ensure open and effective communication and engagement with its beneficiaries, with the members and stakeholders about the organisation and its work. The board should consider organisational responsibilities to the wider community, society and the environment, and that may be something that maybe you haven't considered before that would be considered best practice. The board should put in place arrangements to deal with complaints constructively, impartially and efficiently. And the board should ensure proper arrangements for the management of members as set out in the governing document. And we'll look at all of these examples in more detail in the governance health check. And the last one there, that the board should demonstrate public benefit in line with its organisational purposes. And for anyone that is a registered charity, you should be familiar with the term public benefit. It's something that you have to report on annually and to the Charity Commission. But for those of you that aren't registered charities, it's about demonstrating your impact in line with your organisational purposes. And there's a lot of work being done at the minute and helping organisations to demonstrate their impact and tell their stories about the good work that they're doing in their organisations.
Okay,
So back to Denise there, who's going to explain to us how to use the governance health check.
Okay, thanks, Denise. So you can see on the screen at the moment a page from the Governance Health Check, and in there you can see the structure that I was talking about. So top you're seeing there, Principle 5 being open and accountable, and then the underneath is the principle, and then down the left-hand side in that column, being open and accountable, you can see the kind of questions about how the board behaves, how the organisation behaves, that would give an assurance that the organisation is in fact behaving in an open and accountable way. So for example, listening and responding and representing the views of beneficiaries and users, making sure that there's regular and effective consultation with stakeholders. And then the section that we're going to be looking at in particular is the one in yellow, which is, does the board ensure that there is regular and effective communication with key stakeholders? But just before we look into the detail of that, you can see the layout that I've mentioned earlier. So you've got the not met, partly met, fully met. And so really as you go through as a board looking at this, you want to decide which box you're in. And then in order to help you to decide that, you can see on the right-hand side some suggested evidence. Now, I would say don't panic if you haven't got absolutely everything on that list. It would be a great organization that has absolutely everything on that list. And some things are more probably relevant to larger organizations, maybe than smaller organizations. So I suppose what you're looking for is a feeling yourselves that you're hitting the mark in the context that you're working in. So for example, with this one we're looking at about ensuring that there's regular and effective communication with key stakeholders, you're looking at things like information being provided, which is timely and relevant and accurate and good quality. So you're also looking at things like your AGM or your annual report, any newsletters or websites or social media posts that you do, and whether there's member or user participation, regular meetings, or maybe you might have done a community audit of your local area and you have a report about that, or you might have asked for feedback about a particular service that you're offering. Those kinds of things are evidence. The word stakeholders can be a wee bit off-putting. It just means somebody with an interest in the work that you're doing. So that could be a funder, it could be a service user, it could be a member, it could be just a member of the local community who's interested in your work. There's a whole range of different people who potentially could be stakeholders. And if you, Denise, don't mind going on to the next slide, you can see then the DIY committee guide example. So you can see there's a whole explanation under Principle 5 about stakeholder engagement and why it's important. So that, for example, it's saying that stakeholder engagement is important because it makes you sure your organisation continues to meet the needs of the community or the people you're working with. It helps you to ensure you've got good engagement and support to address any concerns and to continuously improve your work and keep in touch with changing environments. And there's a whole section on the DIY committee guide about stakeholder engagement, what it is, what it might look like, and some of the practical things that you might think about as being mechanisms for doing that. But you may have lots of others, and there's no necessarily one hard and fast way of doing this. It's really about making it as useful for you and as appropriate to you and your setting as possible. They're just suggestions and just ideas to help you do that. So we've got a little poll just to get a bit of a sense of what your view is about stakeholder engagement. And Denise will share the poll in a wee second, but just to give you a kind of tee it up for you a wee bit, the questions that we're asking are, do you know who your stakeholders are? So if you do, great. If you don't, say you don't. And if you're not sure, tick that box. And then it's got a list here of how you might engage with your stakeholders. And just remember that you can use the little bar on the right-hand side of the poll to push it down. So you could engage with your stakeholders through social media, through newsletters, through formal meetings, emails, consultation events, conferences, seminars, or maybe another different way. And then, are there any stakeholder groups that you find it difficult to engage with? So yes or no. So if you could take a wee minute and just complete the poll, that would be really helpful. And then we'll give you a bit of a sense of what the scores on the doors are at the end of that now, Denise. Um, so just for everybody's information, you can So the majority of us, 93% of us, do know who our stakeholders are, which is brilliant, because it's much easier to engage with people if you know who you're engaging with. There's a few people on the call who are a wee bit unsure, and that's something that maybe you might want to use the resources on the DIY committee guide to kind of help you explore a wee bit and have a wee think about. And then there's a real plethora of ways that people are engaging with their stakeholders. Social media is the most popular, I think, there, followed by formal meetings, emails, and letters. And then we have consultation events coming up there, with still newsletters and circulars very popular, conference and seminars, and then there's an other section. So that's great. And then there are 58% of us are saying that there are groups that are difficult to engage with, whereas 42% feel no, everybody's fine. And just looking at the chat, I can see a variety of answers there. Some people saying older people's groups perhaps are difficult to engage with, and actually there's an interesting one: older members of our youth club. That's often an issue, particularly with youth work, isn't it, to kind of maintain contact with young people as they get a little bit older. Um, and again, people who are not online, it's very convenient, isn't it? We're all very guilty of that sometimes, where we're focusing just on our online communication. But you're quite right, there, Elaine, that there's lots of people who are still not online, and that can leave people very much out in the cold. And maybe we have to think about different mechanisms to engage with those. And then there is that, yes, somebody's referencing a challenging situation about not engaging with stakeholders. And I suppose it's funny you say that. I was training for a group yesterday, and it's not that they don't want to engage with stakeholders, but they don't really know how to go about it. And they've kind of got out of practice with it. And sometimes it can feel like a big mountain to climb. Um, and also sometimes it's easier, and if you might feel as an organization you're slightly under attack maybe from stakeholders, it can be easy to circle the wagons and not look outwards. um this I always think stakeholder engagement is a funny thing. It can feel like it should be the easiest thing in the world, but actually sometimes you can get into a pickle with it, and it isn't always all that easy. So it's interesting to see those comments in the chat, and thank you all for your kind of honesty about sharing those challenges that you're facing, because you never know who else is on the call and who else that might help. So thank you very much. Denise, I'm going to hand back over to you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise, for leading us through that. That's super. So now we're on to the second page of the governance health check under Principle 5. And you can see there we have three key questions there. And again, it's a stakeholder question. The first one there: is your board accountable to key stakeholders about its own work and the governance of the organisation? And some of the things that people might think about in relation to that is maybe about their annual report or having their AGM, so regular meetings. We also have a particular question there: and does your board consider organizational responsibilities to the wider community and society? And if you are a community development organization, for example, and this is probably ingrained in you, but actually, have you done maybe a community audit? When is the last time that a community audit was done? And we all know time is flying by, and you may think it was done recently, but in actual fact, it might have been 7 or 8 years ago. So these sort of prompts and the suggested evidence can help you with, putting things on the agenda to actually say, well, do we need to do this again? Because our environment has changed and our community has changed, maybe massively, in the last few years, and perhaps we need to do it again. But the question we've got highlighted there, to look into more in depth today, is: does your board consider the environmental impact of the organisation's work? And this is the environmental impact. For the suggested evidence, we could be looking at an environmental policy, or maybe a green policy or sustainability policy. We might have different labels that we use. We might call it a carbon neutral policy, or it might be part of another policy. But the point is, has the board considered the environmental impact of the organization's work? And you may think, oh, well, we're only a small organization. What can we do? Sure, goodness, we're tiny. We don't do much. But if you have an office there's always a little that you can do. For example, in here in NICFA, we a very simple, cost-effective thing that we did. We took all the bins out of all the offices, and now you have to walk to the kitchen to put your waste into recycling bins. It's not really a big effort because everybody would be going to the kitchen to make a cup of tea anyway. So it's no big deal, but it was just about we got together as a staff team thinking about how could we make changes which really don't cost much in the organization, and we came up with quite a few. And you can have a look here on the DIY committee guide um, to read a wee bit more around it. And I think it's good, maybe if you have people on your committee that aren't really interested, maybe in their environmental responsibility, and maybe you're find it difficult to put it on the agenda or have that conversation. Maybe actually showing them excerpts from the DIY committee guide and how as voluntary organisations and charities, we do have a responsibility, surely, to the environment and to the planet and to our community. So there's little things that we can all do. And one of the examples actually that somebody was talking to the other day was about how it related to their finance policy as well. In that, they were looking at, well, you get mileage perhaps as a staff member for traveling to somewhere on the place of work. And if you're carrying another passenger, maybe giving them an extra 5p per person that they're carrying. So if colleagues are going to the same venue for work, surely it makes sense that they would travel together. So there's a way then that's positively impacting on the environment as well. So if you don't already have an environmental policy or have thought about it, actually about how you can do things, have a look here at the DIY committee guide. And you can see here we have got Volunteer Now have very kindly shared their environmental policy. And if you click on that there, you can have a wee look at it. And it may be that you might want to use it as a template or a basis for developing your own policy. And you can see there that they've included their policy statement and the scope of the policy. So they realize they're not going to be able to do everything, but it's a starting point, and they're going to talk about continually reducing environmental impacts within the organisation and communicating that to staff and to volunteers that they're working with. And activities covered just right down to paper, the use of paper, encouraging people to use their devices and not printing off, to recycling, and about energy and water, and about responsible purchasing as well. And I know another thing that we did in here was we purchased foil for the back of radiators to keep the heat into the building, which was probably saving us money as well. I think that brings us nicely onto the poll there, Denise.
Yes, indeed. And I suppose I would just say that we worked as a team. We had a little working group to put together our environment policy, which was really great for me because a lot of my staff were perhaps more motivated, more knowledgeable than I was. And it was really great to have that little group coming together. And we've started with our first year, we've done quite a bit of benchmarking, which has also been a useful exercise because it really helps you to see where the potential for change is. So we've just looked at our year one benchmarking, and we're starting to kind of put more effort into year two now. So because it's shone a light on a couple of key things that we think we can do. So it's just a constant work in progress. And the other thing I've noticed as well is that more funders are asking for environmental policies, and that's certainly something I've seen this year, which I probably hadn't really seen a great deal in the past. So these kinds of things are important in lots of different ways. So we're going to look at the poll again here now. Hopefully you've got the hang of polling on Zoom. So the first question there is, does your organisation have an environmental policy or similar? Is it covered in a different policy? So again, we've got a yes, no, or an unsure. And the second question is, do the staff and or volunteers follow the procedures in it, or the procedures that have been agreed, or is it just window dressing? I suppose is the other option there. And
Mhm.
we've got a yes, no, or unsure. And then the third question is, are you aware that taking steps to reduce energy consumption can save money? So we'll just give you a wee minute, and don't forget you can move down through the questions by moving the little grey bar at the side. Right, that's really interesting actually, because when we were preparing this this session, I wasn't sure that most organizations would have an environmental policy. So that's interesting to know that over 60% of you do. Just under 20% of you don't, and then there's about 20% of you roughly unsure. And again, 44% of people feeling that people are following the policy, 25% not, and 31% are again not sure. And everybody practically, 94% are thinking that reducing energy consumption can save money. So it's very interesting how many of you have a environmental policy. That's great to hear. That's lovely.
Yeah,
Great.
it's really, really positive.
Yeah.
And for the people that don't believe there's an issue with climate change and that there, hopefully question number 3 is something that you can use to swing your argument in terms of doing something to reduce energy consumption in your organization. If it's going to save money for the organization, surely that's really important for the organization. And I think as well about communication. So Denise, you were saying about having the policy. That's that's great that so many do, but we're unsure or don't, that the people are actually following it. So what do you as an organization then need to do to make sure that people are following the policy? So do we need to communicate it again? Do we need to put it on the agenda? Do we need to put it in your newsletter, or whatever communications you use to try and get people to think about it again and start following it?
Great. Thanks, Denise. So, the other thing I would say is that our working group is a really good way of getting people to follow the policy, because it's not just me as a chief executive who's saying this is important. The other staff in the wee group are actually sort of flagging issues, and that can be a real motivator for everybody to kind of get on board with it. So,
Yeah. It sounds
that's
like
our experience. So.
yeah, it sounds like you have a team of champions there, Denise, which
I
is great.
have. I have a wonderful team. Okay, so do you want to move on then, Denise, and we'll have a wee look at the next bit of the health check.
Yeah.
So you can see the next page there, which is the health check for the Principle 5. And while we're going to focus on the first one, which is complaints, I'll just quickly whiz you through what else you might be looking at. So this is around requirements around admitting and managing membership, and we'll look a bit more about that in a minute. Looking at up-to-date written voting members in the organisation. If you're charitable, does your organisation fulfil the public benefit requirement? And that was what Denise was talking about earlier, which is whether or not you can demonstrate the positive impact that you're making and who you're making that for. And then does your organisation assess the impact of its work? And then does the organisation consider the indirect positive and negative impact of its work? And that's important whenever you're doing the public benefit reporting to the Charity Commission, because they do ask about positive and negative impact. So, and again, you can see the evidence and the opportunity to write down whether you've met or not met the question that's being asked. But this little bit, we're looking at the appropriate procedures to deal with complaints. And I mean, complaints are a part of life. There will always be complaints. And I think it's really important to try and see them as opportunities to improve what we're doing, because we'll not always get it right all the time. And there's always ways that you can improve things and make things better. On the DIY committee guide, there is a section there that talks you through what to do if a complaint arises, and how you might think about dealing with it. And it gives you samples for things like complaints procedure or whistleblowing procedures. So there's really good resources there that you can use to put some of this stuff in place if you haven't already got it. And then the next slide shows you a sample for a complaints process form. Again, this is an example just of a downloadable resource, and there's plenty of these of all sorts of shapes and sizes on the DIY committee guide. And that's something you can just simply download. Often they're in Word documents, they're not PDFs, and you can download them and adjust them to work for you as an organization so that you can just work away with them. And again, this is quite a formal process. And if you're a very small organization, you might want to sort of simplify the process. That's absolutely fine. But at least you've got a template there to work with, and something that you can start with. So Denise, I'm going to hand on to you to talk about membership.
Great, thank you, Denise. And this is the last page of questions in the whole of the governance health check. But last but not least important, of course. And the 2 questions there that we want to focus in there is all about your membership and about your voting membership. And sometimes organisations, they refer to maybe their committee or the board as the members. Some organisations might refer to the volunteers that all help out, or maybe all the people that engage in their service, the service users or their beneficiaries. They might refer to them as the membership. But actually, are they the voting members of the organisation? In a lot of cases, they may not be. So if you think about, if you don't already have a register of members or a list of membership list, then we would encourage you to do that, to think about who are actually your members. So if you think about your annual general meeting, your AGM, who is it that you invite to your AGM? Who is it that has the right to vote at the AGM? Do you know that? And when you sort of press on this question and asking people to understand who actually has a vote in their organisation at the AGM, sometimes people don't know, because maybe the people before them, when the organisation was set up, didn't put a register of members in place. Okay, but it's something that I would highly recommend to you all, because they are your key stakeholders. Your members, the voting members of the organisation, are generally the group of people that can elect the board, that can elect the committee. So they are powerful people in your organisation. So you need to know who they are. And quite often the governing document will talk about who is eligible to be a member and how they will be admitted to membership. Maybe it's at a meeting of the committee or the board, or maybe there's a membership policy that will outline exactly how they will be admitted. Your governing document will also include, and when I say governing document, I'm talking about your constitution or your articles of association, for example. There usually be a section in there about termination of members. When do you no longer become a member of the organisation? And again, that's key information that you would want to hold in your register of members. So if you go on to the DIY committee guide, you will get linked through to on this section to NICFA's advice note on running a charitable company. And it is a legal requirement for companies to have a register of members, but it is recommended best practice for every organisation that has a wider membership than its board to have a register of members. You need to know who your members are, because if you have a situation which is potentially contentious in the organisation or in the community, this becomes paramount about who actually has the vote in your organisation at a special general meeting or an AGM. And of course, you have legal responsibilities to notify members of the AGM in the first place. And indeed, there would be more detailed requirements on company members than say on an unincorporated association members. So you can see from this table, it's really simple table in Word. It's just the name of the member, their address, when did they join, any particular categories of membership they are, any specific notes, and the date of ceasing to be a member. Okay, so do you cease to become a member when you don't renew your annual subscription? Or do you cease to become a member when you step down from the board? What is the process that clicks in that ceases you people to become members of your organisation? So if that is something that you don't know or haven't really thought about, then I would encourage you to bring it back to your committee or board meeting and to find out what the answer is on that. Or maybe it's that you need to actually delve into it to find out a bit more about what has been the custom and practice in your organisation for years. Okay. So that takes us on nicely then to any questions.
She's saying, Denise, that her board is attempting to remove membership from key stakeholders despite clear definition in the governing document. And she's asking, she's saying there's no authority to stop them. I just wondered if you've got a reflection on that for her.
It usually says in the governing document that you can't, well, first of all, to make any changes to the governing document, it's not the board that can make the changes, it is the members. the members have to make the changes to the governing document, not the board. So if the board are trying to do that without consulting the members, then I would say they're acting outside of their governing document. Because that, it's the members, the wider voting members of the organisation that will make the alterations to the governing document either in an annual general meeting or a special general meeting. So the members hold the power there at the end of the day. So if the members don't want to approve that change that the board is recommending they make, then they have the power to refuse it.
And I suppose the question I think that's in behind that is, what if the board don't ask the members? And I assure that the board think that they don't need to ask the members.
Well, if the board is trying to bypass the members, then the members need to show the relevant clauses in the governing document to the board. I would try that as a first approach. But if they're still ignoring them, then the members have the ultimate authority, usually, and can call a special general meeting in line with their governing document. So it's really important that they consult their governing document to see exactly what it says. And at that special general meeting, they can hold the board to account with that. So I would suggest trying that there as a first port of call. So there's no more questions. So looking now at, what obstacles there may be in you taking this forward. Will you use this now as an opportunity to go back to your board, go back to your committee and say, I was at a governance workshop and they were suggesting that we carry out a review and carry out a review of our governance, a conversation around governance, and can we use this here? So I would use this as an opportunity to take that forward. You may be thinking, oh, they're not interested, but you could be, you could be surprised. There could be other people on the committee saying that's a really good idea. And we're going to have recordings of these webinars, all 5 of them. So you can share them once they're ready with the rest of the committee and board and see, where would you like to begin and how are you going to approach using governance health check. So there's no more comments in the chat. So we'll say goodbye to you all and thank you very much for attending and thank you.